Chapter 4. The Girl Out of the Country. I closed my eyes and lay back in the seat. Before Daddy was killed, he, Mommy, and I had gone to the beaches in Virginia a few times. But other than those trips, we haven't traveled many places. I had never been up north and had only read and seen pictures of cities like New York, Washington, D.C., Boston. Mommy tried to get me excited about the trip by telling me we would see Washington and Boston on the way to Cape. Someday, she said, we'll go to New York City. She said she had been there once herself, but she went with her elderly adoptive parents who weren't much fun. She could barely remember it. But we'll have wonderful times going to museums and shows and eating in the famous restaurants, right, Richard? Absolutely, Archie replied. Your life is really just beginning, Melody. See, Mommy said. As we rode on, I listened to their conversation. Archie talked about the cities he had been to, comparing them and complaining about this one and that one, raving about others. He claimed to know the best restaurants in New York and Chicago. He had been to Las Vegas many times and Los Angeles at least 3 times. He bragged about people in the entertainment industry that he'd met and gotten to know in various bars and restaurants where he worked. He said he was for sure he could call any of them on the phone and get them to consider Mommy. Mommy squealed and laughed with delight at all his promises. I couldn't believe she was so gullible. But then I remembered Daddy once telling me that if you want something to be true hard enough, you'll ignore all the proof that it's not so. Mostly, you won't ask questions to give you answers that you don't want to hear. Mommy should be asking Archie, if he's so friendly with all these important people, why he didn't have a better job himself. How did he end up in Sewell? I was tempted to lean forward and fire these questions to him myself, but I didn't want to anger Mommy, so I tried to sleep instead. We stopped for gas and got snacks and drove until we reached Richmond. Archie bragged about knowing a little Italian restaurant. The owners, which he claimed, would surely remember him and give him special treatment. He promised Mommy that he would take us someplace special every step of the way. However, when we turned up on the street where the Italian restaurant was supposed to be, it wasn't there anymore. That's the trouble with these little restaurants, he remarked. They go in and out of business so quickly. Let's just stop at a roadside diner, he decided, and pulled into the parking lot. I wasn't hungry, but Mommy insisted I eat something. When we waited for our food, I took a closer look at Archie, trying to understand what Mommy liked about him, especially after she'd been married to a handsome man as strong as Daddy. Besides having patches of freckles on his face, Archie had them on the back of his hands as well. His pink skin was interrupted here and there with white blotches. It looked as if he had been spattered permanently, staining with milk. I thought his wrists were not much wider than mine or Mommy's, and laughed to myself at the thought of him trying to pick up a shovel. No wonder the heaviest things he ever hoisted was a glass of beer. Archie was full of nervous energy. He lacked Daddy's strong, quiet, calm manner. Archie's gaze was forever wandering. When he answered questions, he rarely looked at you. He looked down or up at the ceiling or fiddled with the spoon while he tried to reply. When we waited for our food, he described how he'd once been a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas. He demonstrated how he flipped cards and hid aces in the palm of his hands. He had been one of the best blackjack dealers in the whole city, he said. So why did you leave the job, I blurted, finally filled to the brim with his stories. I was underage, he said, and he added with a wink, I was throwing my back to the casino looking for the big win all the time, just like the rest of the poor fools. But it was fun for a while. It must have been exciting, Mommy said. The lights, the glamour, all those rich people and the entertainers you must have met. Yeah, sure, he said. If we had been doing all that his life. I've had some pretty good times in Vegas, but I've had some pretty good times wherever I am. That's why you ended up in Sewell? I asked, sharply as I had intended. Mommy threw me a reprimanding look, but I kept my eyes fixed on Archie. He hinged his lips in the corner of a smile like a cat. It looked like a nice little town at the time, he replied. I thought I'd settle there and take it easy. I thought I was ready for the simple life, but I was wrong. He laughed, and then Mommy laughed too. Boy, was I wrong about that. There's nothing wrong with the simple life, I snapped. They both stopped laughing. What's wrong with having a decent job and friends you can count on in a nice house? Archie shrugged. Nothing if you're 75 or 80. That's stupid, I said. Mommy scowled. Melody, you apologize. Go on. It's all right, Archie said. She's confused. Remember what they say, you can take a girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of a girl. He winked at me. I don't care if the country stays in me, I muttered. That's because you really haven't been anywhere yet. Just wait, he promised. You'll come around to my way of thinking. Hardly, I thought. I'd rather be buried forever in a coal mine. Our food came. I ate sullenly while they jabbered about things that they were going to see and do. Every time Archie mentioned a new place, Mommy squealed. He had been to Niagara Falls. Of course, he had traveled through Yellowstone. He had been to the Grand Canyon, had ridden over the Golden Gate Bridge, and had been to the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville. He had even seen the Alamo, and he claimed that he'd gone riff-rafting and skiing in Utah. You must be a lot older than you looked, I remarked in a casual tone. What? Why? He held his fork of food at his mouth and waited for me to reply, his thin lips stretching into another plastic smile. Because if we believe all the places you've been to, you're about 100. The smile finally left his face. Well, I don't lie, Missy, he said. I can't help it if you've been shut up in a small town all your life. He realized how angry he sounded, glanced quickly at Mommy, and replaced his angry expression with a syrupy smile. But thankfully, that's all going to change, right, Hallie? Yes, she shot a fiery look at me. It definitely is. I shut up after that. They wanted to have coffee and dessert, but I didn't. I asked to be excused and if I could wait in the car. Neither seemed unhappy about getting rid of me. Archie gave me the keys and I left the diner and flopped in the rear seat of the car, fuming and frustrated. They took their time, nearly a half hour before they came out, arm in arm, giggling like children. How's the country princess doing? Archie asked as he started the engine. Wonderful, I said. Good, because we don't want any unhappy country princesses in our chariot, do we, Queen Hallie? No, she said. It's against the law to be unhappy, isn't it? Exactly. I, King Richard, do hereby declare that all tears and sadness are prohibited from our lives from this day forward. Anyone who complains about anything gets a demerit. Anyone who has 2 demerits becomes a gopher. Gopher, Mommy asked. Yeah, you know, go for this, go for that. Mommy got hysterical with laughter and we were off. Where were you born? I asked Archie after a few minutes on the road. Me? Detroit. Don't you have any family? Not that I care to remember, he said. Why not? Melody, Mommy chastised, I taught you better than that. You know it's not nice to pry into someone else's personal affairs, she said. I wasn't prying, I was just making conversation, Mommy. You complained about me being too quiet before, didn't you? Yes, but you don't have to cross-examine Richard, do you? I just wondered if it wasn't the other way around, I said with a shrug. What do you mean? Archie asked. I just wondered if it wasn't your relatives who would rather not remember you. Melody? Archie wagged his head. She's a card. You're going to be fine, Melody. In the rearview mirror, I saw his smile fade and his eyes suddenly turn glassy cold. She's not usually like this, Mommy explained. It's all the excitement, I'm sure. Archie said nothing. He turned on the radio. Darkness grew thicker as we drove in the shower deep into the downpour. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and they were apparently got worn away. The window became lined with streaks. Looks like we won't make much time or distance that I hoped, Archie remarked. Best thing we could do is find a motel and pull in for the night. Whatever you think, Richard, Mommy said. You're the seasoned traveler. We're just your capable hands. It was enough to make me want to puke. I started angrily out the front of the window and interrupted now by the coming car headlights. They made the drops of rain look like slivers of ice that sent shivers down my spine. About 10 minutes later, Archie turned the car into a parking lot of a motel. Rain was falling in sheets by now, so hard that we could hardly see the motel's neon sign. Archie pulled his jacket over his head and ran through the raindrops to the office door. The moment he left the car, Mommy turned to me. "Melanie, I wish that you would treat Richard with respect. He's an adult, you know." "What did I do?" "You talk to him as if he was one of your school friends, and I don't want you asking lots of personal questions. It's impolite. If he wants to tell us about himself, he will, okay?" "I really don't care." "Well, start caring. We're going to get together for a while, and for a long time, actually. We're here to get along. We should be grateful that Richard's doing all the driving." She leaned towards me, her eyes full and pleading. "Oh, honey, try to be happy. Soon you're going to see how wonderful these new things are." "Think of that," she conjoined. "You should be happy that you're getting this opportunity. It's like one that I never had. I was forced to live with people I didn't like and endure terrible things." "Like what?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Someday I'll tell you," she replied, and a distant look in her eyes, the look of someone lost in her memories. "When will you tell me?" "When you're old enough to understand." "I'm old enough, Mommy. I'm 15. You should take a good look at me once in a while. I'm not a child anymore." "I look at you plenty. You're still growing and at a sensitive stage. I remember how I was at your age. Trust me." She reached over the seat and put her hand on mine. "I want only the best for you. You believe that, don't you, Melody?" "Yes, Mommy," I said, wanting so much to believe her. The door was pulled open and Archie hopped in, slamming it shut behind him. He brushed the rain off his face. "Man, that's a storm. But we're in luck. This place is almost filled. They had one room left." "Good," Mommy said. "One room?" I thought. "All of us in one little room?" Archie drove ahead and parked in front of room C. "Okay, we're going to have to move quickly. I'll get the door open, and first you girls decide what you need for overnight, and we'll just bring that in, okay?" Okay, Mommy said. He jumped into the rain again. Mommy turned to me. "What do you need, Melanie?" "Mommy, how can we all sleep in one room?" I asked mournfully. "I'm sure there's 2 beds, silly." "But now start acting like a grown-up." "You want me to think that you are. Concentrate. What do you need?" "The small suitcase," I replied. "All right. Why don't you run inside? Richard and I will bring all the things that you need. Go on, honey." I opened the door and raged like a hurricane outside. With my hands over my head, I rushed towards room C. Its door was wide open and I lunged through it. I looked around the room. It had dull brown walls and a stain near the baseboard, where the 2 double beds with the dark brown night table between them, which was sat in an old-fashioned telephone. Behind me was a dresser and a standing lamp with a faded yellow shade. The closet open, some hangers dangling, was next to the bathroom doorway. I went into the bathroom and tried to close the door, but it was out of alignment. There was no shower curtain around the tub, and there was a long rust stain down its middle from the back of the drain. Water dripping in the sink, and above the cabinet was a cracked mirror. Mommy and Archie came charging in from the rain, laughing. Was everything going to be funny, even this horrible room? "The bathroom door won't close," I declared. They both stopped laughing and looked at me. Archie raised his right forefinger. "That one?" he said. "One what?" I asked. "Complaint. One more and you'll be the gopher our whole trip." "Very funny," I said with my hands on our hips, "but what about the door?" His laugh wound down to a dying lawnmower as he approached to inspect it. "When you close it," he said, "just lift up the handle." "Thank you." I took a hold of the door handle and stepped back into the bathroom, closing the door as he had instructed. It still didn't close tightly, but it would have to do. I heard them both giggling again. When I stepped out, I saw Archie with a bottle of gin, and he was pouring it into 2 glasses. "This ought to chill you out," he said. They tapped their glasses and swallowed. "I just noticed there's no television set in the room," Mommy said. "Did you bring something to read, Melanie?" "No, we left too quickly, remember? I had to leave my books behind anyway, and there is no room in the suitcases," I complained. Archie leapt to his feet. "That's 2. 2 complaints, you're the gopher." Mommy laughed. They clicked glasses again. "We really need something to mix with this, don't you think, Hallie?" "It would help," she said. Archie dug into his pocket and produced $2. Why don't you go down to the motel office and get us a can of tonic water or some ginger ale? Archie thrust the money my way. Stay under the overhang so you won't get wet. I looked at Mommy. She sat on the bed with a wide grin on her face. Be a good sport, honey. I plucked the bills from Archie's hand and grabbed my coat on the way out the door, thinking I needed to get away from them for a while anyway. Their laughter followed as I slammed the door behind me. Looking around, I saw the dreary the motel was. The parking lot was torn up in many spots, and the neon sign had letters burnt out. Closing my coat tightly around myself, I hurried under the overhang, noticing as I went that apparently there were other empty rooms. The small office. Inside there was a red imitation leather settee and slits and cracks in it. A worn cushioned chair, a coffee table, and a counter behind sat a short, bald man. He had a long, bushy eyebrows and thick lips, and he looked pale as the day-old dreadworms. When he smiled, I saw his missing a lot of teeth. How can I help you? He asked. I need a can of tonic, please. The machine broke. I got some in the fridge back here, he said, indicating the room in his back office. Just tonic water? Yes, please. 1 minute. He brought it out. I paid him $1 and noticed the payphone on the wall behind the settee. Can I have change for the phone, please? Sure thing. He gave it to me and I went to the phone. He sat and picked up his magazine, but his attention was fixed on me. I dialed Alice's phone number, put in the required change, and waited for her to answer. She did so on the second ring. Alice, it's Melanie. Where are you? I tried to call you 4 different times after school. Oh, Alice, I don't know where I am. Someplace near Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia? I gazed at the man behind the counter. He wasn't pretending to be interested in anything but me now. I turned so that my back was towards him and spoke as softly as I could. We left, Alice. Mommy had it all planned. We got home and she was packing. We're with Archie Marlin, I moaned. What? Where are you going? Providencetown on Cape Cod, at least first. Then I don't know. Mommy wants to find a new place to live. You're gone for good? Alice asked incredulously. Yes. My tears blinded me. Could you say goodbye to everyone for me, especially Mr. Kyle? He was my favorite teacher. But how will I know where you are? I'll write as soon as it's decided. Oh, before I forget, I left my school and library books on the kitchen table in the trailer. Grandma Arlene knows. Would you go by and get them and return them for me, please? Sure. I can't believe this. Imagine how I feel. You know how I hate Archie Marlin, I said. The operator interrupted and said I needed to put in more change, but all I had left was a nickel. Goodbye, Alice. Thanks for being my best friend. Melody, she called as if I were drifting away like a ghost. The connection went dead. I stood there holding the mute receiver, afraid to turn and show the motel manager tears in my eyes. I took a deep breath, wiped my face with the back of my hand, and cradled the receiver. Really raining out there, the manager commented. Yes. You folks come far? Sewell. Not that far. I started away. You forgot your can of tonic, he said, nodding toward the can that I left on the shelf by the phone. Oh, thanks. I went back for it and paused on the way out the door again. Are you all booked up here tonight? Booked up? He laughed silently, his shoulders shaking. Hardly. I thought so, I muttered to myself and left. When I returned to the room, I found Mommy and Archie dancing to music on the radio. Mommy looked embarrassed for a moment, then smiled. Richard, can you make the drearest of the situations happy? Here's your tonic water. I thrust the can at him. Thanks, Princess. Any change? I handed him a nickel. I needed to call Alice and tell her to get my books, I said. We owe you 95 cents plus interest, he said, winking at Mommy. Then he snapped open the can and poured some into his glass and Mommy's. There are 2 empty rooms, I declared. Archie paused with the surprise painted on his crimson face. There are? That's not what the baldy told me at the office. Well, how do you like that? He just wanted to get us into a more expensive room, I bet. Wouldn't it be better renting two? I asked, snorting. Nah, this room is more expensive than two, he asserted. What difference does it make now, Mommy said. The difference is I'm tired. So go to sleep. We'll put down the lights for you, she said, and did so. They then turned the radio on low. Seeing that I had no other choice, I unbuttoned my blouse and lay back with my back to them and took it off. And then I kicked off my shoes, slipped out of my skirt, and quickly slid under the blanket. It smelled as if I had been stored in a box of mothballs. I kept my back to them, but I knew they continued to dance and drink gin and whisper. I prayed to fall asleep quickly, and miraculously, maybe because I was so exhausted, I did. But later in the night, my eyelids slapped open. I heard the soft moan and subdued giggle, followed by the sound of bed springs squeaking. They thought I was asleep, so I didn't turn around. I heard the similar sounds through our thin walls in the trailer. I knew what that meant, and I knew what that meant now. How could Mommy let another man put his hands on her and be so intimate with her so soon after Daddy's death, I wondered. Didn't she still see Daddy in her mind and hear his voice, remember his lips on hers? Archie was so different from Daddy, too. He was weakling. Couldn't Mommy wait till she got someone that she could really love? She's just confused, frustrated, and afraid to be alone, I told myself. Maybe it would all change when we found another place to live and she was happier with herself. Surely she wouldn't want to spend the rest of her life with a man like Archie. I squeezed my eyelids tighter and pressed my ear to the pillow and tried to think of something else, but their heavy breathing grew louder. Mommy moaned and then grew silent. Moments later, Mommy slipped to the bed beside me. For now, at least, we're all supposed to pretend that I heard and knew nothing. In the morning, she would be here in the bed with me, and Archie would be in his. It was a sad way to start a new life, lying to each other. We left the motel as soon as we were all washed and dressed the next morning. In the daylight, the motel looked seedier. Even Mommy commented. Archie laughed it off, saying, "Any port in a storm. I've slept in lots worse." "I believe that," I muttered. If either of them heard it, they didn't react. We stopped for breakfast off Route 95 north of Richmond and then continued. I saw the Capitol building in the distance off the highway. We didn't stop in Washington, D.C. to do any of the sightseeing Mommy had promised, nor did we go to Baltimore or the city along the way. It was apparent that Mommy and Archie wanted to get us to Providencetown as soon as possible. I began to think about the family I was about to meet. I knew very little, of course, but I did know that Daddy had a younger brother who lived on the Cape with his family, and that Daddy's family had been in the lobster business for a long time. Daddy's father was retired, and he and my grandmother had lived in a house too big for just the two of them. That's all I knew. When I asked Mommy how many children did Daddy's younger brother have, Mommy said that she remembered that he had twins, a boy and a girl, and another child that had been born after she and Daddy left Providencetown. She couldn't remember if the third child was a boy or a girl, but she did say that she thought the twins were about my age, maybe a year older. Daddy got married before, Daddy's brother got married before you and Daddy, I asked. I think so, maybe, I don't remember. Please, Melody, don't flood me with questions that I can't answer. You'll get all your answers that you want in Providencetown. But, well, how much younger than Daddy is his brother? A year or so, she said. He's different, she added. What do you mean? You'll see, she said, and refused to do anything but leave it at that. With all this family mystery looming ahead of me, I couldn't help being nervous. Mommy had obviously told them about Daddy's death. Was his parents' grudge over? How come after all these years we were finally going to see them? When I pushed Mommy about why we were going to finally see Daddy's family, she sighed deeply and said, "It was what your father would want now, I'm sure." I told myself that must be true, and I must be strong for what things that might remain for us. "You know," Archie said as we headed into Massachusetts, "I just realized I've never been to the Cape." "How is that possible?" I asked dryly. Mommy flashed her eyes at me, but Archie widened his smile. "I'm not the one sailing or fishing," he said. "But I thought you went riff-rafting," I said quickly. "That's not sailing or fishing, that's just a thrill," he replied. "Cape Cod has its charms," Mommy said, "but the people can be hard. The ocean makes them that way." "It didn't make you hard," Archie said lustily. I turned my attention back to the scenery flying by. That night we slept in a much nicer motel. We stayed in a suite and I had the sofa all to myself, and I was able to wash my hair in the shower too. We ate dinner in the motel and I returned to the room while Mommy and Archie remained in the lounge listening to music and drinking. They stumbled in hours later, giggling and whispering. I pretended to be asleep as they clumsily made their way to the bedroom door. Even though the conditions were better, I had a harder time falling asleep now that we were in Providencetown, and the very next day I'd be meeting Daddy's family. I had a small trembling inside. Where was my new home to be? It felt like a balloon floating and bouncing, carried away with the winds that Mommy and Archie family fancied. Maybe we didn't have all that much in the bank in Sewell, but now I had nothing. Not a friend, not a familiar sight, no one with whom to confide. I had never felt so alone. I could squeeze my eyelids shut until they ached, but I couldn't close them out of the fears that kept tossing and turning and fretting me in and out of nightmares until the first light of the morning streaked through the motel room curtains. Mommy and Archie slept very late. I washed and dressed and sat reading in the visitor's guide, wondering if at least we could do some sightseeing. Finally, tired of being shut up in the stuffy room, I went on a walk around the motel. By the time I returned, Mommy and Archie were awake. We went for breakfast. They were both very subdued and hardly talked with their eyelids drooped. "Are we going to do some sightseeing before we go to Providencetown?" Archie groaned. "On the way back," Mommy said quickly. "We want to get to Cape Cod as early as possible today." "I thought we were going to go explore new places," I muttered. "Oh, Melody, please, no complaints today. I'm afraid I've had a little too much to drink last night," she said. I said nothing. After breakfast, we moved mutely, repacking the car and getting in for the drive. I saw many good views of the ocean, especially when we crossed Cape Cod's canal. It was a beautiful, warm day. The sailboats and fishing trawlers looked like they were painted on blue water. As I smelled the salty air, I had the funniest feeling that I was returning to my real home. Perhaps I was experiencing what Daddy would have felt if he were alive and with me on this journey. I would learn about him by going to this place. I began to overcome my nervousness and fear in a way that Daddy would be with me. Mommy fell asleep as we continued our journey up Route 6. The miles slid like a long ribbon with no end. When the road sign indicated that we were getting closer to Providencetown, a tiny charge of excitement passed through my heart. How could Mommy sleep through this? After all, she was going to own too. Finally, Archie, who had been quiet himself, announced that we were close to the tip of Cape Providencetown. Mommy stirred, opening her eyes and stretching. I caught sight of the dunes. It looks like a desert. Then the Pilgrims Monument came into view, and Mommy told me what it was. "The Pilgrims supposedly landed here first," Mommy said. "The Blue Bloods make a deal of that." "Blue Bloods?" I asked. "People who can trace their history back to the Mayflower." "Your father's family," she added disdainfully. "They think that's what makes them better than the rest of us." "Is that why you and Daddy left?" "That among other things," Mommy said, and sewed her lips shut. "Where do we go?" Archie asked. "Turn left," Mommy ordered. "And they are expecting us today, Mommy?" Yes, she said. Jacob should be home. I see the tide is in. How can you tell? I asked. The waves are breaking the beach up on the beach grass, see? I nodded. Fishing boats go out and come back at high tide, Mommy explained. I remember that much, but don't ask me too much more, she said quickly. It was as if it was painful for her to remember. Archie followed her directions, and we moved slowly through the narrow street on both sides, which was a small souvenir shop, boutiques, and restaurants advertising fresh lobster dinners and taverns with names like the Masthead. Here and there were signs advertising bed and breakfast accommodations. The buildings of some, which looked very old, made the gray cedars shingles. All the vacancy signs were dangling in the breeze. Mommy explained that it wasn't the season, so tourists weren't really here. These small streets get so crowded in the summer. It's wall-to-wall people. Yeah, just like the Vegas Strip, Archie commented. Turn here, Mommy directed. We went east on an even narrower strip that had small Cape Cod houses on both sides, none that were more than a couple 100 feet, with rough-looking grass in front. But some had flowers. I saw a lilac bush towering as high as its roof. And we rolled along. I heard Mommy mumble. It seems like 100 years ago, but not much has changed. Suddenly there were no more houses, just a stretch of dunes. I thought we would stop, but Mommy told Archie to continue following the road. It turned north, and then on the right, just a few 100 yards or so further, a house appeared. I could see the beach and the ocean not far away. A flock of terns circled over something on the sand. There it is, Mommy said, nodding at the house. There was a light brown pickup truck parked in the gravel driveway in the front of a dark blue four-door automobile with its right rear jacked up. A tall, lean man with the hair the color of Daddy's was bending over a tire. He didn't turn to look at us, even when we stopped near the driveway. That's your Uncle Jacob, Mommy said softly. He finally glanced up. I saw the resemblances in his face, especially his chin and cheekbones, but he was much leaner, and his build looked a lot much older than Daddy, not younger. Even from a distance, I could see the deep lines in the corner of his eyes. He had a much darker complexion than Daddy had been. He stared a moment, and then went back to his tire as if he had no interest in who we were and why we were there. Should I pull in? Archie asked. Yes, Mommy replied with a deep sigh. Well, Melanie, it's time to meet your family.